Jannik Sinner and WADA have settled. It is a 3-month ban for Jannik Sinner. It has begun already retroactively, and it will end right ahead of the Rome Masters before Roland Garros. That is the outcome and the end of what has been a Jannik Sinner anti-doping saga that started last March, but became public right before last year's U.S. Open. News broke this morning. It will be a 3-month suspension, which caught me off guard because I had not even considered the possibility that settlement was in the range of outcomes. I had neglected to remember that settlement was even on the table. And in that sense, the news this morning surprised me. I did not see it coming. I thought that mid to late April, when the CAS trial was set to begin, that is when we would get the wheels moving once again in approaching a resolution to the Jannik Sinner anti-doping case. Now, outside of that initial surprise of forgetting that a settlement was a possibility, I am not surprised by this outcome because I feel it makes a lot of sense for both sides being WADA and Jannik Sinner. First, let's do like a quick case refresher in case you're just coming into this in any major way, but more likely it's just been months since we've talked about it, and there might be some forgetting, or I just think it's good to go over the really relevant parts of this, and I won't get into too much detail, I promise. But ultimately, the Court of Arbitration for Sport, the CAS, was going to be faced with a complex decision that involved some level of subjectivity. I would argue a whole lot of subjectivity. Why is that? Well, there is no precedent for such a unique set of circumstances where a knowledgeable fitness coach treats a physio with a banned substance that is then passed on to the client, in this case, Jannik Sinner. There is no precedent to lean on for that, and it becomes very complicated when trying to assess how much fault Jannik Sinner bears for that. Now, the ITIA, in their original ruling, has clearly established negligence on the part of Ferrara and Naldi. That begins with purchasing the clostebol spray, applying it to someone who is clearly and obviously going to have physical contact with Jannik Sinner. All of that was clear negligence already established in the original ITIA investigation, but it was also established that Sinner could not reasonably have been aware of their negligence. But still, the ITIA made it very clear that the tribunal was going to need to make some judgment calls about whether or not Sinner should be held accountable for his team's negligence. The original tribunal, based on a lot of reasoning that I don't want to get into again, but it's all in the original ruling, they decided that Jannik Sinner deserves zero. He bears zero fault or negligence for his team's negligence because of how everything went down in the specific way that it did. However, with WADA's appeal, they were then going to new people, new humans who are going to look at the exact same case and try to decide if the punishment determined was an appropriate punishment. And this is the main thing I've been preaching this entire time from start to finish. Different people can make different decisions about this stuff because it's subjective. This is how I ended my last video on the matter immediately after the WADA appeal became known. The one thing that I've been saying this whole time is that anti-doping is subjective and that makes people very uncomfortable, and they want to feel like it's black and white. They want to feel like it's about facts and it's very clear cut. And that's not how anti-doping is. Now, if it were so simple and straightforward and objective, you wouldn't need human beings on tribunals to figure this stuff out, right? You could just go by some objective measure, right? But no, you need tribunals. You need 3-person tribunals because one person isn't good enough. You need 3 people on the tribunal. And if it was so simple, you wouldn't need an appeals process. You wouldn't need to build a system in which when you disagree with the tribunal's decision, you can go to another set of people who then look at the case again. And if it was so straightforward and so simple, and if it wasn't subjective, you wouldn't have an appeals process that regularly disagrees with the initial ruling. Regularly, they're not on the same page. So with that, the reason Jannik Sinner settled becomes quite obvious. It's the same reason why there's any time a settlement ever. Both sides fear an undesirable outcome. Both sides. And that's why settlements happen. And the reason why there's a fear of an undesirable outcome is because the outcome didn't appear to be clear because of the subjectivity involved in all this. So why did Jannik Sinner settle? He settled because he is no longer at the mercy of an unpredictable human tribunal and the timing. He sees this obviously as a favorable settlement to him because of the timing. He does not have to miss a slam. He's played the Australian Open and won it. He can come back for his home tournament, the most important Masters 1000 on his schedule, which is Rome, which gives him obviously also some nice prep for Roland Garros. It is ideal timing for Jannik. The trial date in April, that was, I suppose, ominous timing as the slams over the course of the Northern Hemisphere summer take place in pretty short succession. And that was dangerous for Sinner, the timing of all of it. So he gets ideal timing. He is no longer at the mercy of something that is unpredictable. The downside for Jannik Sinner is, of course, he loses that squeaky clean rap sheet, so to speak. The original tribunal said Jannik has no fault, no negligence. And now with the settlement, the implication is that he has some fault, some negligence, not significant, not intentional doping. That would be a minimum of 2 years, but some fault or negligence for what occurred. Why did WADA settle? They were seeking a maximum of 2 years, and they had said that they were looking for anywhere between 1 and 2. So WADA gave ground as well. WADA was probably okay with this outcome because they did set the precedent that surely they wanted to set, which is that a player, an athlete, because WADA is much bigger than tennis, an athlete is responsible for their team's negligence. A bad actor can't use their team as protection from anti-doping violations. They saw the original tribunal's ruling of no fault or negligence as a slippery slope, as something that in the future, and Jannik was never accused of this from any credible source, and there was nothing in the ITIA investigation that suggested that this was a case of Sinner, using his team as sort of a shield for, some sort of darker systematic doping. But the point is, for WADA, every time a ruling is made in anti-doping, you are creating precedent. And obviously, the precedent of responsibility to one's team is one that they wanted to create. And I believe that is why they felt the need to appeal. This is the statement from WADA. WADA accepts the athlete's explanation for the cause of the violation as outlined in the first instance decision. WADA accepts that Mr. Sinner did not intend to cheat and that his exposure to clostebol did not provide any performance-enhancing benefit and took place without his knowledge and as the result of negligence of members of his entourage. However, under the code and by virtue of CAS precedent, an athlete bears responsibility for the entourage's negligence. Based on the unique set of facts in this case, a 3-month suspension is deemed to be an appropriate outcome. All right? So that just about sums it up. Ranking implications. Sinner is going to lose 2,100 points, 2,100. It opens the door a little bit for Carlos Alcaraz, but not really. He would have to go on an absolute tear. For Zverev, the opportunity to become number one is, first of all, more significant than Alcaraz's opportunity because Carlos has already been there. He's got a chance to pull a Marcelo Rios and become number one before winning a slam. He needs 2,495 points. Indian Wells, Miami, Monte Carlo, Madrid, the Munich 500 that he always plays. He needs 2,495 points. It's not about defending. It's about earning that amount of points. And if he does that, he will become number one. Legacy implications for Jannik Sinner. Hard to answer. We will see. However, this is my opinion. The public has a very short memory. Ask yourself right now, how do you think about Marin Cilic? How do you look at him? Do you think about the 4-month suspension? Initially 8, reduced to 4 upon appeal. You think about that with Marin Cilic, or has everybody moved on? No, there is, again, no apples to apples comparison to what happened here. The set of circumstances is unique, and honestly, the place that Jannik Sinner was at in his career is unique. Halep and Sharapova are even different because their doping issues, like their run-ins with anti-doping violations, coincided with an immediate, an almost instantaneous loss in form and dominance. And I believe that as a result, actually magnified the importance of those events in their particular careers. You can look at a Nicolas Jarry or a Beatrice Haddad-Maia. Well, they're a little bit different from Jannik because they aren't huge names, but I feel like they go about their business on the tour without their anti-doping violations and subsequent suspensions being a huge part of their reputations or the discourse around those players. So ultimately, I tend to think that people forgive and forget, especially when nothing heinous or egregious happened in terms of intentional doping to gain a competitive edge, unless you feel that way. And in that respect, it will continue to be the same thing that it was before when there was no suspension. That there are different buckets that people will fall into. There is the casual, unengaged, uninformed. That is a bucket. People who are not looking at the details. Who knows what those people are going to think? That all has to do with kind of whatever their bias is coming in towards Jannik himself, towards doping in sport as a whole. They just kind of go to that. There's going to be a second bucket, the informed skeptic, the people who understand what the ITIA investigation concluded. They understand exactly like what the facts that have been accepted are, and they choose not to believe those facts. That would be the informed skeptic. Then there's a third bucket, which is the person who takes the facts of the investigation as fact. And that's the bucket that I'm in. And I just hope we can avoid option number 1 as much as possible, which is why you should share this video, share this podcast. Just remember that what actually occurred here has not been challenged, and the outcome of a 3-month suspension does not change, or should not change, anybody's view of what occurred, because that is not what was being grappled with here. What was being grappled with here was how much responsibility does Jannik Sinner take for his team. And from WADA's standpoint of wanting that to not be 0, I get it. And ultimately, this feels pretty appropriate. Anything very punitive would have felt inappropriate, in my opinion, as somebody who falls in a bucket number 3. who takes the facts of the investigation as fact. Something super punitive would have felt inappropriate. I also understand the slippery slope, the dangerous precedent that WADA sought to avoid in terms of a player being completely free of responsibility for their team's actions. I'm going to leave it at that. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.